we go. We are recording. If you're joining with your own materials today, or even if you're just watching along and trying to learn some tips and tricks that later on you can decorate some cookies, we are so excited to have you here, really to be able to join in our community events. It really means the world to us. Uh, so First, I want to talk about our experience. So, of course, we're going to be decorating some cookies today. We're going to be learning how to do a flooding technique, a marbling technique. We'll get some fun and funky with sprinkles. I also want to let you know that this is an experience we would love for you to share with whoever is in your space today. So maybe you have friends, family, loved ones of any sort who love cookies, who want to learn about some fun techniques that they could utilize for decorating cookies, especially as we get into the holiday season. Decorating cookies is kind of perfect for any time of the year, but especially now, some warm, delicious cookies. Decorating them for the holidays is always fun, like we're doing today for fall or Halloween. So definitely bring anyone you want into the space. And the chat box is open. So if you have anything you want to say, questions of any sort, or you just want to say something fun, we're absolutely going to be in the chat box chatting. So we definitely want to see you there as well. All right. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. And although I am your very good friend today, bringing you this event, I am not going to be decorating cookies with you, but I would love to pass it off to our artist who is going to. Everyone give it up a round of applause for Charlotte. Hello, Charlotte. Welcome to the party.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me. I hope that you are all very excited to follow along and make some lovely cookies today. Now, for me personally, I really like cookies. You can go ahead and sound off in the chat box if you'd like to let me know how much you love cookies, but I'm pretty sure that it's a safe bet that we all love them quite a bit. They're very lovable things. They're so delicious, and I'm so excited to decorate them with all of you today. Now, for me personally, I do love cookies, but I also do love to decorate them. So I know a lot of people prefer to eat them, but today we're going to be decorating a couple together. Now, I'll show you guys a couple of little techniques. I myself am a home baker, so I'm self-taught, but it's something that I have done my entire life that I love quite a bit. I do it all year round for sure. I like to use different flavors at different times of year, but I have to admit, this is really the cookie decorating time. We are entering this lovely holiday season, and I also love fall baking especially. So I'm really excited to bring this to all of you. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is just run through our inventory. So if you did receive a kit and you're following along with us, we would love to just show you guys what kind of came in there, explain all of these little pieces, and talk about how we're going to use them. And then, of course, we're going to get into our decorating. So I'm quite excited. My cookies look kind of bare right now. They need some icing. They smell delicious, and I can't wait to go ahead and get started. So why don't we just jump right into it? Now, I'm going to pan down my camera so that we can just sort of see everything that's laid out in front of me. But one thing I want to mention is that cookie decorating is a little bit messy at times. And so if you would like, you could always wear an apron like me. You might want to have a nice clear counter space. You could even lay down a placemat. You might have received a food craft placemat or some tissue paper inside of that kit. If you'd like to work on top of that, it's a good idea. Sometimes it's nice to kind of have a really big space kind of cleaned off in front of you so that you can get it nice and messy. We have some sprinkles, we have some icing, so just keep that in mind as we move. For me, I'm definitely going to roll up my sleeves, and I'm always glad to have my apron on. So let's go ahead and pan down our camera. So here is what I have in front of me, everybody. I have a lot of fun stuff here. So what we're going to do first is just run through all of these materials and just familiarize ourselves a little bit. So the number one thing that is on everybody's mind is going to be our cookies. Now, I want you guys to open up the packages. If you did receive our kit, they're inside of a little bit of plastic to keep them fresh. There also could be some bubble wrap. That's to keep them from getting broken. So please go ahead and open them up if you haven't already. And the very first thing that I invite you guys to do is smell them. Now, I know you can't see my nose, but you'll just have to take my word for it. I'm definitely smelling the cookie. So the cookies smell delicious and they are delicious. They're a sugar cookie, so kind of your basic cookie for icing. It's a very wonderful buttery recipe. They're so fresh and tasty. And so we can't wait to put some icing onto them because it does enhance the flavor just a little bit more than it already is. But I love to give them a little sniff just because they smell so buttery, they smell so sweet. And it lets me know that it's time to get excited because I am that much closer to actually getting to eat one. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about are our icings. Now, these have come in a piping bag already, which is really convenient because we don't have to put them in there ourselves. But as far as this icing is concerned, the first thing that I want you guys to do with it is just kind of mush it around inside of the bag a little bit. So you just want to give it a little massage. Everybody needs a massage sometimes, including our icing. And so this is just going to help us to recombine the contents of the piping bag. So I want you to do that with all of your colors. So you're going to go through, we have 4 colors here. This is our fall cookie decorating kit. So we have some really nice autumnal colors. They kind of look like the colors the leaves are turning outside. It's starting to happen. This is really the best time of year. So I'm seeing it happen. I'm trying to spend as much time outside in the trees as possible. And so whether you have trees near you or not, we're bringing a little bit of autumn into your home today with our lovely colors. So just make sure that you have mushed up every single icing bag. We're just going to mushy it around. Now in here, we have something called royal icing. That's a very fancy name, but it really is not a fancy thing at all. Royal icing is a very simple mixture of powdered sugar, and then it can be anything from water to lemon juice to milk. For today, we've used water to keep it shelf stable, but it's a really great icing because all it's done is make our sugar nice and fluid and workable. So this is something that got its name during the Tudor times. So that was a royal family in England. And back then, sugar was a hot commodity. It was something that was very hard to come by. And so they created this lovely icing to cast over cakes and keep them fresh for the royal family who were able to afford it. So what royal icing does is not only enhance the flavor and makes the cookie sweeter and tastier and all that kind of stuff, it also will keep your cookies fresh for up to 2 weeks once we ice them. So that's a really great thing about royal icing. It also dries very hard, it's very firm, and it kind of makes them a great thing to bring to people's houses. If you're interested in making cookies, especially if you learn a thing or two today, it's a great travel baked good, which I know doesn't sound like a big deal, but it really is. A lot of baked goods are very difficult to bring places. So cookies are a great answer for that. And thanks to our royal icing, all of the moisture and the flavor will be sealed inside the cookie. So that's a really great thing about it. Now, another thing that we have are some sprinkles. I've already emptied mine into a little dish. I really recommend that you guys do that. For those of us who are following along, sprinkles are a really fun thing. They're very colorful, they're tasty, they're crunchy, but they also can be messy. So I highly recommend that you put them into a little bowl. They were given to you inside of an envelope. And so if you just want to open up the envelope and pour its contents into a bowl, that would be wonderful. Now, this actually makes it a lot cleaner because when we are sprinkling our cookies, we can kind of let the sprinkles roll off the cookie and into the bowl. So this is a really good tip. I like to say that sprinkles are like the glitter of, baking and all that kind of stuff. So they will wind up everywhere. You'll have sprinkles. You'll find them months from now. So if you want to keep them contained, definitely do a little dish. And in this dish, I have a couple of toothpicks. So you should have received toothpicks inside of your kit. It's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack, but I promise that they are in there. And so you're going to want to grab those and keep them close. I really, really like having the toothpick here. If you can't find a toothpick, you can use a chopstick. And if you don't have either of those, you can also get away with using the tines of a fork or even a butter knife. This is going to be a very important tool just to make sure that our royal icing lays nice and flat. All right, now another thing that we have and where we're actually going to start is on our little cookie decorating piping guide. So this is kind of like a worksheet that we've provided inside of the kit. And the reason why we've done this is because we want to make sure that you guys have a moment to get acclimated to the piping bag. So this is going to give you a place to practice, to kind of get a feel for what the icing is like coming out of the piping bag, how quickly does it flow, what's the consistency like, and how big should you open up the piping bag. So all of those things are things that we can figure out on our worksheet, and then we'll be able to turn over to our cookies and do the real thing. So why don't we start here? For those of us who are following along, if you want to put in the chat box, if you've ever decorated a cookie before, I would love to know I think it's something that I've done probably forever. I feel like I remember decorating cookies for the holidays as a very young child, but it is always wonderful. I've changed my technique over the years. I've definitely got better at it because in the beginning it was a little bit tricky, but honestly, it's very user friendly. It's a great art form. And the best part about it is that you can eat your mistakes. So remember, if anything goes wrong today, you could either cover it in sprinkles or you could just eat it up real fast before anybody comes home. So don't worry about it. Now what we're going to do, we're going to open up our piping bag here. And I see in the chat box, we don't usually do royal icing. Yeah, you know what? I didn't either. I always used like the cans of icing. You know what I'm talking about? Like the Betty Crocker in the plastic container. I love that. I could eat that with a spoon. But recently I started to make all my own stuff. So I've been making royal icing. And even though it's a little bit more laborious, it is really very simple. Royal icing is such a simple combination of powdered sugar and some type of yummy liquid. So it's very, very easy to make at home. And honestly, it gives you a lot more ability to customize it. You can add cocoa powder, you can add lemon zest, all kinds of things. So maybe you should give it a shot. It's really easy and it's really fun. And honestly, if you don't have a piping bag, you can put it into a Ziploc and it'll work just fine. So we're going to start by opening only one piping bag. So I know that we have four. You might be tempted to cut them all open and get started, but I think we should start with one. We're going to work on our practice sheet. We're just going to get a feel for it, and then we'll move over to our cookies. Now, the reason why I say that we should start with one is because you're going to learn something. So we're going to open it up so that it's kind of small, and I'll show you guys how much we cut off. But a lot of times, the very first time you open it, you either cut it too small or too big. And so we're just going to start with one, and then we'll learn something, and we'll take what we've learned to our next piping bag. So let's start slow. You are going to need a scissor. But before I cut it, I want to show you guys this very, very tiny bit that I'm going to cut off. It's so small, you can hardly even see it, just the little tiny tip of the piping bag. It's about 1/4 of an inch. It's very, very small. Okay, and it's good to start small. You can always make it bigger, but it's definitely impossible to make it any smaller once you've cut it. And another thing I want to point out, just in case you did struggle with opening up the piping bag, is that it makes it a lot easier if you push the icing down toward the knot of the bag so that this whole front area is empty. So that makes it a lot easier to cut through the top, and then your scissors don't get sticky. So let's start using our piping bag. Now, this is kind of an intuitive process. It's very personal. It's a lot like holding a pen or a pencil where everybody kind of has their own comfort. So my comfort position is to take my thumb and I put it kind of perpendicular to the direction of the piping bag. And then I split my remaining 4 fingers on either side of it. You see that? So this gives me kind of like 360 pressure around the piping bag because you're probably going to end up using a lot less pressure than you would think. So let's start by being gentle. We're going to begin in our free space down at the bottom here where it says freestyle. And we're just going to kind of wiggle. We're just going to make some swirls, all kinds of stuff like that. And we're just going to get a feel for what the icing is like coming out of the piping bag. So let's talk about starting and stopping. So I usually like to kind of anchor it, and then I lift the piping bag up off the surface that I'm working on. So I'm actually like 1 or 2 inches, even 3 inches at times, above the surface. And so I kind of allow the icing to just fall down onto the worksheet. And the reason why I do that, it seems a little counterintuitive. It feels like something that would give you less control, but it actually makes the lines a lot smoother. So right off the bat, we're going to notice that our nice royal icing is very, very fluid. It kind of has this lovely consistency. It does flow. And we're going to try and work with that consistency rather than against it. And so one thing that I'd recommend is to control it as little as possible. And so we don't really want to move slowly. We don't want to have the piping bag to touch the surface. We want to kind of allow it to just be who it is. So it's going to be flowing. And that's why I recommend that you lift the piping bag up off the surface of what you are icing. Now I mentioned anchoring. So that's when you kind of stick down the beginning of the line, you lift up the bag, and then you stick it back down on the other end. So I start by kind of adding the little dot low, and then I lift the piping bag up. And then I bring it back down to close up the line. So that's another thing that we're going to try and focus on here. Starting and stopping the flow of the icing is often difficult. And if you move too slowly, you may end up with a wobbly line. You may also end up with a line that is thicker than you intended. If you want thin, clean lines, it's usually best to move quickly. Okay, so we'll do some dots. And when we do those dots, there's another thing I want to point out to you. So another characteristic of our nice royal icing here is that it does spread quite a bit. So once you lay it down, it kind of holds its shape just for a moment, and then it begins to spread out from its center. And so when you make your nice clean lines or your dots or anything like that, sometimes it looks perfect. And then as it settles, it will kind of spread from the center and it might bleed together. Or they might close up the gaps between everything. And so if you want to keep things nice and clean and tight, and you don't want all of your shapes to blend together, sometimes it's better to start with them farther apart so that they have room to spread without touching. And honestly, tracing all these little guys, I think is harder than actually just frosting a cookie. And so I want you guys to warm up, definitely. But don't go too crazy with your warm up. Don't be seeking perfection right off the bat and understand that anything that gets onto the worksheet is icing you can't eat. So let's move on to our cookie in just a moment. Just because if you're like me, the priority is to eat the cookie, right? And we definitely want some lovely orange icing on there. So I'm going to stop with my worksheet in just a moment here. I'm going to maybe do another little circle just so I can warm up the round shapes because our cookies are circular. And then I think we'll move on to our cookie. So I'm going to leave this worksheet off to the side here. If you don't feel ready to move on to a cookie, you can keep working on the worksheet for as long as you'd like. I just want to remind you one more time that any icing that ends up on the worksheet can't go on a cookie. So just keep that in mind as you move through the worksheet. Now, the entire other side of the worksheet is blank. And what's nice about it is that it's been laminated. And so that means that you can use a damp paper towel to wipe it clean and start fresh. But for me, I'm going to set this off to the side. And I'm going to move over into cookie time. So I'm going to bring over my cookies. And we're going to start by talking about the flooding technique. So this is a really easy technique where we use the fluidity of royal icing to our advantage. So that means that we're actually going to use the fact that it spreads from its center to make a really even, flat top on our cookies. So why don't we open up our other piping bags? Maybe you learned something, maybe you opened it too big or too small. And remember, the easiest way to cut it open is to pinch the icing away from the tip of the bag. So you can just go ahead, kind of slide it down to the bottom. I even did that with the orange bag that's already open. And that's just because sometimes when you leave them without pinching it away from the tip, it can sort of fall out. So it'll just leak out the opening again because it's so fluid. And so I like to kind of, when I know I'm going to rest for a moment without picking it up, I like to just pinch it away from the opening. Okay, so I've done that on all of my remaining piping bags. And now I'm going to go ahead and open all of them. So remember, apply what you've learned. Now we know what the consistency of the icing is. Sometimes there's some variability between colors, but generally they all are about the same. So we learned maybe we need a smaller opening, maybe we need a bigger one. Now, royal icing does dry fairly quickly. So the reason for that is because sugar really does not like to be wet. And so it expels water pretty rapidly, which is nice because it means that we can work with that. We end up with this really great solid design. It will dry on your cookie in a few hours and it'll be really firm to the touch. And it's very durable. And that's why it's so good for traveling. But it also means that we have to move a little bit quickly because there will be a crust that will form on the top, kind of that very top layer of the icing. And so we don't want to disturb the crust. We want everything to be nice and smooth. And so we do have a little bit of urgency here. Nothing crazy, but we want to just kind of keep a sense of urgency as we move. So keep that in mind. So in order to flood this cookie, what we're going to do is start by giving it an outline. So let's just begin by making a big ring on the outside. Now, I recommend that you do this a quarter of an inch to a half of an inch in from the edge of the cookie. And the reason I'm telling you that is because it does spread. So remember, as we put more icing into the center and it spreads, that could risk running over the sides. And so I think it's very important to leave a little bit of an edge just so that if it does push out from the center, we end up having a space for it to leak out to. So it's kind of like a built-in bit of security. Now, if you're being very fussy at this stage, you can grab something and actually fan this part, and that will keep it nice and solid. So that'll give this part a head start because what we're actually doing is building a bit of a dam. So it's kind of like that nice flood technique that we're doing here. You can kind of think of it like it really is a flood, where we're going to build a dam around the outside so that nothing leaks over the edges. So what we have to do now is fill in the center. But because royal icing spreads from its center, we only need to fill in about 95% of the area on the cookie. Now, I know that that might sound confusing, but what I really mean is that we want to leave some blank spaces because the royal icing tends to help us by filling in its own gaps. So let's see what we got here. 95 to 98% of the cookie. And you'll get a feel for this as you go. So I'm going to show you what I mean. I filled in my cookie, but there's a lot of little spaces. You see those? So it looks a little crazy right now. So what we're gonna do while the icing is still nice and wet, we're gonna grab our toothpick and we're just going to encourage those gaps to close. Now it's likely that if we just left the cookie alone, most of them would close, but we just wanna make sure that all of them do. So we're gonna help it along. I usually use a little bit of a circular motion just to keep things moving. And then once you've closed in all of those gaps, you might be left with some texture on top of the cookie. I'm just going to tap it on my cutting board a few times, and that's going to settle out the top. So that makes it nice and smooth. And it also encourages any air bubbles that may be underneath to kind of rise to the top and escape, which is what we want. So this is our very first cookie. Ta-da! You can see it's really, really smooth. It has a great sheen to it. And so what we're going to do with this is set it off to the side and we're going to encourage it to dry a little bit. So we're going to give it a nice few moments on its own and we'll circle back to that one as our last cookie. So I want you guys to leave that one blank, cover it with some icing, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so for our next cookie, we're going to be employing a very similar technique, but this time I want us to add some sprinkles to the edges. So this will just be to demonstrate how we can add those sprinkles. Now, sprinkles are really tasty. I think that they add some really important texture to the top of a cookie. So we're going to be adding those to the edges. So I'm just going to repeat what we already did. And actually, every cookie will start this way. We always want to have this nice little bit of insurance around the outside. And sometimes, as you'll see me doing here, I actually kind of double or triple up on that just to make sure that I have a sturdy dam around the outside so that the icing will stay in the middle. If your icing does run over the sides, honestly, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's really okay. You can kind of use your thumb to scrape it back up onto the cookie. And after a few minutes, it gets dry enough to the point where it doesn't run anymore. And so that's okay. But I usually just sprinkle the heck out of those cookies and then nobody can really tell. All right, so we've done the same thing. We gave it that little head start. Now we're just going to fill in the center. Now sprinkles need a little bit of glue, and so the wet icing is going to be our glue. So I'm going to go around and around, and you can do this sort of in any way that you'd like. I tend to make circles into the center, but you can honestly make any kind of wiggly, wobbly, stripy shape that you would like, just as long as you leave a few gaps. So 95 to 98%. And then we go in with our toothpick and we cover it. Now, this is really the basics of using royal icing and decorating these cookies. So this is kind of the main thing that we need to learn today and take away from this is our flooding technique. And then we're just going to build on this in a minute. So there's my yellow cookie. And now while the icing is still wet, we're going to put some sprinkles around the very outer edge, just because I think that looks cute. So I'm demonstrating here that you do it over the bowl. And then this way, the ones that don't stick, the ones that fall off the cookie, will fall back down into the bowl. So that's why this is so important to have them in this little dish like this. So I'm going all the way around the edge, just like that. And if you want to maybe add a couple more here or there. Yeah. Okay, now once I get the sprinkles on the cookie, I actually tap the bottom like this. And I do this over the bowl just in case any fall off. But what this does is it kind of jostles all the sprinkles on the surface and it causes them to sink down lower into the icing, which is really going to help them adhere to the cookie. So that is our little sprinkle cookie. It's kind of like harvest looking. Like I think it has a very autumnal color scheme. And if you have any spices at home, if you have cinnamon or pumpkin pie spice, anything like that, and you just wanted to add a little sprinkle to the top, that would add some great flavor and another color to the mix. All right, so we've learned the very simple basics. I think that we should do something more fun now. So let's try and build on our flooding technique. And what we're going to do now is called marbling. So this is a really fun thing. Basically, we use more than one color on our cookie. And then while the icing is still wet and settling, we actually use the toothpick. And instead of just closing up the gaps, we sort of swirl it all around and we make all of these great patterns and stuff like that. Now, this is a very effective technique. It looks really impressive, but it's so simple to accomplish. And if it starts to get messy, just remember, cover it in sprinkles and you'll be fine. So I think that I am going to use maybe yellow and brown. Now, you want to pick at least two colors. I'm going to try and do a spider web today, so that's why I'm doing two. But if you would like to just use all of the colors and make kind of a big tie-dye autumnal pattern, you could totally do that too. The only rule is that you use more than one color. So I'm going to start with brown. I'm going to make a nice big circle around the outside. And remember, we're going to double up on it a little bit. We want to make sure that it does its job. So I'm going to go around maybe even 3 times. This could be my 4th. I think I've lost count here, but I just want to make sure that it's nice and thick. Now, if you actually cut your piping bag so that the tip is a little bit thicker, that might only be one time for you. But I always kind of err on the side of cutting mine small, just because I think it's easier to control a smaller stream of icing. And so that's why I end up having to double up or triple up or quadruple up or anything like that. But it does help me to ensure that the royal icing doesn't go over the side. Because even though that's really not a big deal, it is what we're trying to avoid in cookie decorating, just to kind of keep everything looking really clean. Okay, so the key inside of this cookie is to move a little bit more quickly, because once we get that toothpick onto the icing to mix up the pattern, we want to make sure that all of the icing is still wet so that we can move it around and still have it settle nice and even. So what we're going to do is make some concentric rings. So rather than just kind of wildly filling in the center, we're going to make some rings here. Okay, so I've got some yellow. I think I'm actually going to try and use my white too. Ooh. So I'm going to go for brown, yellow, white, brown, yellow, white. And I'm going to repeat the pattern all the way into the center. Okay, so again, I go around a couple of times just because I cut my icing bags to be so small. But if you cut yours bigger, you can probably get away with just doing once. But I want to remind you too that the icing is still going to spread from its center, and actually over here, it's quite close to the edge. So I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to add an excessive amount of icing to the inside because I know that that will run over the side. It's a harder thing to gauge when you use more than one color. You kind of end up with more icing than you planned just because you have so many colors. We're going to do another stripe of brown. So I'm kind of doing what's called building a target. So just in these concentric rings, going around and around, and you can sort of see it does start to look like a target. I also want to point out that mine is very wobbly and imperfect, but that's okay. Doesn't need to be perfect because we're actually going to screw it up with our toothpick anyway. And that's kind of exciting because it gets really messy. It's really, really fun. It makes you feel super free. And it's also very beautiful. Mine is really starting to get close to the edge here. So you might see mine run over. It's really okay. Sometimes it happens. And it kind of makes it look a little bit melty. So that's kind of fun, a little spooky. Right, so we're almost in. Okay. There usually comes a point where I mess up the pattern, so far so good. Looks like I'm doing all right. So we're almost to the center here. Just a little bit more white. And then I'm gonna put one little spot of brown right in the middle. All right, so now, rather than closing up the gaps with the toothpick, I'm going to hit the cookie against the board. Give it some taps because that will begin that closure of those gaps. And now while it's still wet with my toothpick, I'm going to go out from the center. Just like that. So I'm dragging the toothpick through the cookie. Now, of course, this looks very autumnal, but this is also kind of like a 70s color scheme. So it looks a little bit like tie-dye, a little bit hypnotic, a little bit psychedelic. Okay. Yeah, the 3 colors I think is cool. I was only gonna do 2, and then I just couldn't resist. I love colors, so I went back in with it. But yeah, this is how you would make like a spooky spider web. You can sort of see how it does look like one. And if you had like black and white or black and orange, if you were making like a Halloween cookie, I think that would be perfect. So I really like to do that. And I think that these colors also kind of look like turkey feathers. And sometimes feathers end up having sort of a pattern like this. So you can also just shake the pattern around a little bit to even out the circle slightly. And yeah, then you have your lovely marbled cookie. And if you'd like, you can cover up the edges with some more sprinkles while the icing is still nice and wet. So why don't we just go around the side? I'm going to try and make it like a really thin layer of sprinkles. Last time I made it a lot thicker, but this time I want to maintain the integrity of the pattern. So I'm just going to go around the close edge. Okay. All the way around. And this is a great thing to do because not only is it so easy, but you can imagine it would look really impressive if you had like a whole plate of them. But not only that, it's also very customizable. So right now we're doing autumnal colors. You could do the spider web, like I said, but if you just wanted to kind of mix it around, make it tie-dye, like a firework or anything like that, you can make it into a flower. What's nice about that is that you can use any colors that you would like. So if you were going to a graduation party, you could do the colors of the school. If you were going to the Super Bowl or Super Bowl party, you could do the colors of the team you're rooting for. Or if you were just going to a nice little birthday party, you could do the person's favorite colors, and I think they'd be pretty happy. So it's a really effective way to kind of do something that looks really cool and complicated, but was really easy and just sort of fun. So it's nice to go through and make our nice little spider web, nice and scary. Okay, and we're just gonna build on that one more time. I'm gonna make one last cookie here. So we're gonna take some white icing and I'm gonna fill in the entire cookie. And then I'm gonna make this one have a little ghost face. And then the very last thing that we're going to do is circle back to the first cookie that we started with, and we're gonna draw a little face on top of that one. Now, the reason why we let that one dry for a moment is because I want to show you that if you do leave them to dry a little, the icing that you add will actually sit on top. So it makes it kind of 3D rather than having the colors sink down into each other like when we marble them. Okay, so let's just fill this in with white. We'll put a spooky face on here. I'm really feeling the spooky season. We're only 2 days into October, but It's just such a fun time of year. I have a Halloween party that I'm planning on, so I need to figure out a costume. If you guys know anything you're going to be for Halloween, or maybe if you have a favorite Halloween costume you've ever done, I would love to hear about it. Right now, this is kind of making me think of a mummy. That could be fun. Okay, so we're just closing up these gaps in my white icing. So now I'm going to just show you what it looks like when you add the face right away, just to kind of give a little comparison to our next cookie. You can make a little skull face if you want, or maybe you want to go with the mummy. I think I'm going to try and make like a ghost. You could even just write the word boo. That's pretty effective, right? Okay, so I'm going to take my brown. Now, ghost faces tend to be really long and creepy. So I'm making it nice and long. Ooh. He's a ghoul. Okay, so I gave him a nice ghoul face, but I want to demonstrate that the icing is sort of flat here. It's very flush. And so now we're going to hopefully be able to see the icing kind of emboss on the surface. So let's just draw our little jack-o'-lantern face so our ghost can have a friend. And then we will have gone through all of our techniques. So let's see, which way do I want the top to be? I think like this. Yeah, so this doesn't quite sink down onto the orange icing. Kind of sits on top. And you can imagine if you let it dry for a longer time, it would sit on top for a long time and it would really be 3D. And so there's our little pumpkin face. He's so cute. And you can see here how it kind of sits up on the top. I'm trying to show you from the side, but that's how you would make an embossed design. So that is all that I have to share with everyone today. Those are all of the cookies that we wanted to run through. I wanted to show you some great autumnal designs, some spooky things, and I also just wanted to demonstrate the basics of cookie decorating because it's so easy and so fun. I hope that you have tasted one. I can't wait to dig into these while the icing is still wet. I think they taste extra good. So thank you guys so much for being here. I am going to pass it off to Deanna. She's just going to close us out, but thank you all for tuning in. We're so happy to have you. And I love all of the stuff in the chat box. That sounds great. I hope that you have a wonderful Halloween party.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I'm hopping back in. Thank you so incredibly much, Charlotte. It is so relaxing watching you decorate cookies. Although I desperately want to be decorating my own and eating them, just watching you is really awesome and just such amazing tips and tricks. So, and yes, these will be perfect for a Halloween party, right? So I'm just going to be sharing my screen one last time with everyone just to talk about a few closing remarks. So let me get that shared. All right, here we go. Make this full screen for everyone. So first of all, thank you so incredibly much for joining in into our community event today. I'm so incredibly glad I'm seeing in the chat box you pop in and saying how wonderful of a time you had. Thank you so much. Phenomenal. And I could also listen to Charlotte talk all day. I really could. So everyone, if you loved this, you will of course love some more community events coming your way. So we are getting ready for the holidays, and what better way to do that than learn how to sustainably wrap gifts? So come November 6th, we are having a Shiki event. We'll learn how to sustainably wrap for the holiday season. So you could wrap your gifts in a really unique and fun way without using any paper, no bags. So I'm really excited about that. Also, December 4th, we are having a really fun animal meet and greet. We're going to be meeting some goats, which is just fabulous. So if you want to do a little virtual goat viewing, we are happy to see you there as well. And of course, we've got some fun holiday events popping up. First of all, we have our cute little llamas and alpacas that I have here dressed up for the holiday season, and you could definitely see them too for the holiday season. But we have some other really fun events that we're super excited about. First, we are making some coquito, an absolute delicious drink. If you're a fan of eggnog, you will be a fan of coquito. It's a wonderful holiday beverage. We're going to be painting some face planters, some little ceramic planters that you can put a little succulent in so you can get creative with that. If you are a big pumpkin spice fan like we are over here, try having it some way different than a latte this time. We're going to be doing some hummus making. So putting hummus and pumpkin spice together is beautiful. And of course, we are going to be decorating some cute little piñatas, reindeer style. So we're super excited to be able to bring you these events for the holiday season. And last but not least, I'd love to be able to mention Crafter Club. Crafter Club is our brand new subscription program that we created to better support our hybrid and remote teams. And so, if you want to get involved with Crafter Club and join our subscription program, we would absolutely love to see you there. We're really very proud of it. So, we're going to be sending out an email following this event with all of the information that you see here so you can look more into that. Yeah, our beer is going to be coming to a pinata session later in October. It's one of our most exciting classes. I love it so much. It's really cute. So I can't wait to see you there. And I hope to see everyone else at an event soon. So enjoy your cookies, enjoy the rest of your day and week, and we'll see you in the future. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much again for joining. Bye bye. Thank you.